October 27th, 1942. Dawn. South Pacific Ocean, 420 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Commander Edward P. Parker gripped the rail of USS Northampton as he watched the burning hulk of USS Hornet slip beneath the waves, taking with her 140 American sailors and the last operational fleet carrier in the Pacific. The fires from her ruptured fuel tanks illuminated the water for miles, turning the ocean into a mirror of flame that reflected the catastrophe of American naval power. 4 carriers in 10 months. At this rate, we'll have nothing left by Christmas, he wrote in his personal log, words that would have earned him a court-martial for defeatism if discovered by his superiors. Through the smoke and darkness, he had just witnessed the 4th American fleet carrier lost in 1942, Lexington at Coral Sea on May 8th, Yorktown at Midway on June 7th, Wasp torpedoed off Guadalcanal on September 15th, and now Hornet at Santa Cruz on October 27th. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which American intelligence had dismissed as inferior copyists incapable of innovation, had systematically destroyed over half of America's Pacific carrier force. In shipyards from Yokosuka to Kure, Japanese workers were adding new carriers to their fleet, while America bled ships faster than anyone thought possible. 3,700 miles away in Newport News, Virginia, a welder named Margaret Thompson was about to begin a night shift that would prove Commander Parker wrong. What neither of them knew was that this moment of maximum despair marked the beginning of the most extraordinary production miracle in naval history, a systematic demonstration of American industrial capacity that would transform not just the Pacific War, but the very nature of naval power itself. The mathematics of victory were about to be rewritten not in battle tactics or superior seamanship, but in welding torches, assembly lines, and the sheer productive fury of a democracy that had finally awakened to war. The promise. The collapse of American carrier power in 1942 would trigger a response so overwhelming that Japanese naval officers would later describe it as fighting the stars themselves. No matter how many you destroyed, more appeared. Within 3 years, American shipyards would launch 14 Essex-Class fleet carriers that saw combat, more than Japan built in the entire war. The transformation from disaster to dominance would not come through tactical brilliance or technological breakthrough, but through something more fundamental: the complete mobilization of American industrial democracy, turning housewives into welders, farm boys into shipfitters, and converting the entire nation into what Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had feared most, an arsenal of unlimited productive capacity. Context: the gathering catastrophe. The disaster had begun on May 8, 1942, in the Coral Sea. USS Lexington, one of America's 2 giant pre-war carriers, converted from battlecruiser hulls, absorbed 2 torpedo hits and 3 bomb strikes from Japanese carrier aircraft. Despite heroic damage control efforts that initially saved the ship, gasoline vapors from ruptured aviation fuel tanks triggered massive secondary explosions. Lady Lex went down with 216 of her crew, America's first fleet carrier loss of the war. Captain Frederick Sherman, Lexington's commanding officer, would later testify before Congress. "We went to war with 7 fleet carriers in the Pacific. The Japanese started with 10. Every admiral knew the arithmetic. We couldn't afford to trade evenly, much less lose them faster than the enemy." The second blow fell just a month later. On June 7, 1942, USS Yorktown, heroically patched together after Coral Sea damage in just 48 hours at Pearl Harbor, succumbed to Japanese submarine Yae 168's torpedoes, following the carrier's crucial role in the Midway victory. Though Midway marked a strategic triumph with 4 Japanese carriers sunk, America had lost one of her precious few fleet carriers. September 15th brought the third catastrophe when USS Wasp, operating off Guadalcanal, took 3 torpedoes from Japanese submarine Tuam-19. The carrier burned for hours before being scuttled by American destroyer Lansdowne. Of the 7 fleet carriers available in the Pacific at the war's start, America had now lost 3. Then came the knockout blow. October 26th to 27th, 1942, the Battle of Santa Cruz. USS Hornet, veteran of the Doolittle Raid and Midway, fell victim to coordinated Japanese dive bomber and torpedo plane attacks. Despite desperate efforts to save her, including an attempt to tow the burning carrier to safety, advancing Japanese surface forces forced her abandonment. Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo finished what their aircraft had started in the early morning hours of October 27th. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, faced Congress with stark numbers. "Gentlemen, we have one operational fleet carrier in the Pacific, Enterprise. She faces 10 Japanese carriers. Simple mathematics suggests we have already lost the war." The mobilization miracle begins. But King didn't know about Margaret Thompson and the 1.7 million workers who would flood into American shipyards by 1944. He didn't know about Henry Kaiser, who was about to reduce Liberty ship construction time from 230 days to 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. He didn't know that American shipyards, which had launched exactly one fleet carrier in 1941, were about to achieve the impossible. The transformation began not in military planning rooms, but in the accounting offices of Newport News Shipbuilding. On December 8, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor, Yard Supervisor Clay Bedford called an emergency meeting with his foreman. "Forget everything you know about shipbuilding," he announced. "We're going to build carriers like Ford builds cars." The revolution started with a simple observation from Helen Matthews, a former seamstress who had just been hired as part of the emergency expansion. Watching skilled workers laboriously rivet hull plates in place, she asked her supervisor, "Why don't you sew it together like fabric, one continuous seam instead of thousands of dots?" The supervisor laughed, then stopped. Welding instead of riveting could cut assembly time by 75%. But welding required different skills, simpler skills, skills that could be taught to anyone in days rather than the years required to train a master riveter. The production explosion. By summer 1943, the Essex-Class carriers were rolling off the ways at a pace that defied comprehension. USS Essex herself had been laid down on April 28, 1941, and commissioned on December 31, 1942, just 20 months from keel to combat readiness. But that was just the beginning. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, shipfitter First Class Giuseppe DiMaggio, cousin of the baseball player, led a crew that developed a new technique for installing aircraft elevators. Instead of building them in place piece by piece, they pre-assembled entire elevator platforms on shore, then lifted them into position with massive cranes. Time saved, 6 weeks per carrier. The techniques being pioneered at Richmond by Henry Kaiser spread throughout the industry. Prefabrication meant that deck houses and other fixtures were assembled in production areas where they could be built on their sides or upside down, making welding easier and stronger. What had taken 1,000 workers a month now took 200 workers a week. The numbers began to accumulate with frightening speed. USS Yorktown, CV-10, laid down December 1st, 1941, commissioned April 15th, 1943. USS Intrepid, laid down December 1, 1941, commissioned August 16th, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, laid down August 3, 1942, commissioned November 29th, 1943. USS Franklin, laid down December 7th, 1942, commissioned January 31st, 1944. Each launching became faster. Philippa Kellogg, a welder at Bethlehem Steel's Fore River shipyard, kept a diary that captured the acceleration. January 1943. We're launching a carrier every 60 days. June 1943. Every 45 days. December 1943. Every 30 days. The Japs must think we're using magic. The human wave. The magic was people. By April 1943, 40% of the labourers on Kaiser's shipways and prefabrication facilities were women. At Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Emma Rodriguez, a Mexican-American mother of 3 who had never held a tool larger than a sewing needle, became the fastest riveter in the yard. She could drive 30 rivets in a minute, each one perfect. African-American workers, previously barred from skilled shipyard positions, flooded into the yards after Executive Order 8802 prohibiting discrimination in defense industries. James Washington, a sharecropper from Alabama, became a master pipe fitter at Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. He installed the fuel lines on 5 carriers, each one finished faster than the last. The workers weren't just building ships, they were racing against death itself. Every day without carriers meant more American sailors and Marines dying on islands across the Pacific. Posted on every shipyard wall were photographs from the fleet. USS Enterprise fights alone. She needs sisters. Build them now. The technology revolution. Speed came not just from human effort, but from revolutionary production techniques. At New York Naval Yard, engineers developed modular construction. Instead of building a carrier from the keel up, piece by piece, they built entire sections, complete with wiring, plumbing, and ventilation, then assembled them like giant building blocks. Production was streamlined through the use of highly standardized components, reducing construction time to as little as 14 months for the fastest builds. Every carrier used identical pumps, identical electrical panels, identical fittings wherever possible. Parts manufactured in Detroit could be installed in carriers building in Newport News, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia without modification. The Essex Swarm. The Essex-Class would become the most significant class of warships in American naval history. These weren't just replacements for lost carriers. They were bigger, faster, more capable than anything that had come before. Each displaced 27,100 tons, could carry 90 to 100 aircraft, and could steam at 33 knots, faster than most destroyers. The Japanese noticed immediately. Commander Masatake Okumiya, Air Staff Officer with the Japanese Combined Fleet, wrote in his diary after receiving intelligence reports, "The Americans are building carriers faster than we can train pilots. Each new carrier is superior to anything we possess. We are not fighting the same navy that we attacked at Pearl Harbor." By March 1944, American shipyards had achieved the impossible, launching Essex-class carriers at a rate that exceeded the combined carrier production of every other nation on Earth. The Kaiser Miracle. While the major naval yards built fleet carriers, Henry Kaiser revolutionized the construction of escort carriers, the jeep carriers that would provide air cover for invasion fleets and hunt submarines. Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard alone would produce 50 escort carriers using techniques developed for Liberty ships. Escort carrier USS Casablanca, lead ship of the most numerous class of carriers ever built, went from keel laying to commissioning in less than 8 months. By comparison, Japanese escort carrier Shinyo, converted from a passenger liner, took 2 years to complete. The supply chain symphony. Behind every rivet, every weld, every steel plate lay a supply chain that stretched across the continent. The steel for carrier flight decks came from Pittsburgh, where mills ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The aluminum for aircraft came from Alcoa plants in Tennessee, consuming more electricity than entire cities. In Akron, Ohio, the Goodyear plant produced carrier arresting gear cables, each one capable of stopping a 12,000-pound fighter travelling at 100 miles per hour. Plant manager William Davis pushed production from 10 cables per month in 1942 to 200 per month by 1944. The training pipeline. Ships without crews were useless. The solution came from Captain Daniel Gallery, who proposed using the Great Lakes as a training ground. USS Wolverine and USS Sable, paddle-wheel steamers converted to training carriers, operated from Chicago's Navy Pier. By 1944, these 2 ships were qualifying 500 pilots per month. The Japanese perspective. In Tokyo, The Imperial Naval Staff watched the intelligence reports with growing horror. Captain Toshikazu Omai, operations officer for the combined fleet, later testified, "We knew America would build ships to replace their losses. We estimated they might build 6 or 7 fleet carriers by 1945. The actual number was beyond comprehension." Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese carrier force at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, faced 9 American fleet carriers and 8 light carriers with his 6 carriers. "It was not a battle," he later wrote. "It was an execution." The production peak. By January 1945, American shipyards had achieved a rhythm that seemed impossible. Brooklyn Navy Yard was working on 3 carriers simultaneously. Newport News had carriers in various stages of construction on 6 different slipways. USS Lake Champlain established the ultimate record among wartime completions, commissioned June 3, 1945, after just 15 months of construction. The human cost and triumph. The speed came with sacrifice. Shipyard accidents killed over 3,000 workers during the war. Margaret O'Brien lost her husband when a crane cable snapped at Fall River Shipyard. She returned to work the next week, taking his place on the welding crew. "Every ship we don't build means more gold stars in windows," she told her crew. The shock of victory. The Japanese surrender delegation arriving aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, had to sail past an American fleet that defied imagination. Over 100 carriers of all types filled Tokyo Bay and the surrounding waters. More carriers than all other nations combined had built in the entire history of naval aviation. Commander Tamichi Hara, one of Japan's most decorated destroyer captains, wrote, "We had sunk 4 of their carriers in 1942, and they had replaced each one 3 times over." The production statistics. The final accounting of Essex-Class carriers that saw combat in World War II. Commissioned and saw combat USS Essex, CV-9. December 31, 1942. USS Yorktown, CV-10, April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid, CV-11, August 16, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12, November 29, 1943. USS Franklin, CV-13, January 31, 1944. USS Ticonderoga, CV-14, May 8, 1944. USS Randolph, CV-15, October 9, 1944. USS Lexington, CV-16, February 17, 1943. USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, May 24, 1943. USS Wasp, CV-18, November 24, 1943. USS Hancock, CV-19, April 15, 1944. USS Bennington, CV-20, August 6, 1944. USS Bonhomme Richard, CV-31, November 26, 1944. USS Shangri-La, CV-38, September 15, 1944. Additional carriers commissioned but saw no combat. USS Boxer, April 16, 1945. USS Lake Champlain, June 3, 1945. USS Antietam, January 28, 1945. Several more were commissioned after the war ended. This count didn't include 9 Independence-class light carriers built on cruiser hulls, or over 100 escort carriers produced during the same period. The technology transfer. The revolution in shipbuilding transformed American industry permanently. Techniques developed for wartime production, modular construction, automated welding, assembly line shipbuilding, became standard practice. Workers trained in shipyards became the backbone of post-war American industry. Women who had learned to weld discovered they could master any industrial task. African Americans, who had been restricted to menial jobs before the war, had proved they could do precision work. The strategic impact. By 1945, American carrier production had reached levels that exceeded operational needs. Ships were being completed faster than crews could be trained. Admiral William Halsey testified to Congress in 1946. "We went from having too few carriers to having more than we could use. No nation in history has ever produced combat vessels at such a rate." The workers' legacy. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of VJ Day, a reunion was held at Newport News Shipbuilding. Over 5,000 former workers attended. Margaret Thompson, the welder from our opening, now 67 years old, stood before the crowd. "They call us the greatest generation now. We weren't great. We were angry. The Japanese sank our ships, killed our boys. We answered the only way we knew how. We built more ships than they could imagine. Every rivet we drove said, 'Remember Pearl Harbor.' The economic and social revolution. The carrier building program transformed not just military capability, but the entire American economy and society. Richmond, California's population grew from 23,000 to 130,000 in 3 years. The money paid to shipyard workers, over $3 billion in wages, flowed through the economy, building the American middle class. The shipyards broke social barriers that had existed for generations, proving that women could do industrial work, and African Americans possessed the same skills as anyone else when given the opportunity. The numerical supremacy. By August 1945, the United States Navy operated 14 Essex-Class fleet carriers that had seen combat, 3 additional Essex-Class carriers commissioned but not in combat, 9 Independence-class light carriers, 71 escort carriers, plus pre-war carriers still in service. This force compared to Japan's 6 operational carriers, most without trained pilots, and Britain's 19 carriers of all types. The ultimate testament. In 1962, Rear Admiral Hideo Yano of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force visited Norfolk Naval Shipyard, where many Essex-class carriers had been built. Standing where USS Yorktown had been launched, Yano said through an interpreter, "We knew you were building ships, but we never imagined this scale. How do you fight a nation that can build in one yard what we built in our entire empire? We didn't lose to your navy. We lost to your factories, your workers, your determination to produce beyond all rational limits." The final reckoning. Admiral Chester Nimitz offered the definitive assessment. The war was decided in 1943, not by any battle, but by the launching of new carriers. When we could lose a carrier and have 2 replacements already at sea, while Japan could not replace any losses, the outcome was mathematically certain. Today, the legacy of that production miracle lives on. The techniques pioneered in 1942 to 1945 remain standard in shipbuilding. But perhaps the most important legacy is the demonstration of what democratic societies can achieve when unified in purpose. In 36 months, America went from having 4 carriers sunk and facing potential defeat to possessing overwhelming carrier supremacy that made victory inevitable. The workers who achieved this miracle proved that democracy's greatest weapon isn't military might, but productive capacity, the ability of free people to outbuild, outproduce, and ultimately overwhelm tyranny. The transformation from 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat stands as history's greatest example of industrial response to military crisis. Those workers are nearly all gone now, but their achievement remains. In humanity's darkest hour, when fascism threatened to extinguish freedom, American workers responded with the greatest surge of productive power ever witnessed. The 4 carriers lost in 1942, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp and Hornet, were not just replaced but multiplied. Each new carrier was superior to what was lost, each one a testament to democracy's capacity to transform disaster into triumph. In the end, Japan didn't lose to American strategy or tactics. They lost to Margaret Thompson and her welding torch, to millions of Americans who proved that democracy's ultimate strength lies in the unlimited productive capacity of a free people united in purpose. From 4 carriers lost to 14 Essex-Class carriers in combat, the numbers tell a story of transformation that stands as history's greatest testament to what free people can achieve when their freedom is threatened. They didn't just build ships, they built victory, freedom, and the future. Their legacy floats eternal in the words inscribed on the memorial at Newport News Shipbuilding. Here, American workers answered tyranny with steel, fascism with freedom, and defeat with the greatest production miracle in human history,